The glowing light from the monitor cast a harsh, pale blue shadow across Tuna's face. She wasn't breathing naturally. Her small, calloused fingers hovered a full inch above the black plastic mouse, trembling slightly, as if the device might bite her if she pressed the wrong button. The screen in front of her was dominated by a generic, swirling corporate blue graphic, a default wallpaper that came with the machine. It looked like the sterile lobby of a distant, intimidating bank, dropped right into the middle of our rustic wooden home. For weeks, she had been pushing herself to learn this machine, taking on the heavy burden of the farm's daily ledger to protect our future. But looking at her tightly clenched jaw and the stiffness in her neck, it was painfully obvious. She didn't feel like an equal partner looking at a helpful tool. She felt like a trespasser in someone else's territory. Welcome back to our home. Here in the yard, life moves at the gentle pace of the seasons. But inside, we are slowly learning that some of the hardest walls to tear down are completely invisible. Tuna had spent 2 full weeks trying to make this corner of the wooden house her own. She had placed a small chipped ceramic vase of wild yellow daisies on the windowsill, right where the soft morning sun filters through the bamboo blinds. She had carefully woven a thick, warm fabric rug to keep her bare feet off the cold, damp floorboards. The physical space around her smelled of dried herbs, wood smoke, and freshly brewed green tea. But the moment she looked past the black plastic bezel of the monitor, that familiar warmth vanished. Inside that glass screen, it was still entirely my world, my machine, my confusing terrain. And until that changed, this office would never truly be hers. The strange thing about fear is how entirely situational it can be. Outside, in the thick morning heat, Tuna is a force of nature. Before the dew had even dried on the wide taro leaves, she was out by the bamboo gate. I watched her feed Henry his morning bowl of rice porridge, wiping his chin with a cloth, while effortlessly balancing a heavy woven basket of chicken feed with her other arm. When the local roofers arrived to fix the damaged shed, she stood right in the center of the dusty yard. She pointed out the rotted wooden beams, her voice carrying a quiet, unshakable authority that made the men nod in immediate respect. She knows the dark soil. She knows the rhythm of the monsoon rain. When Bartang needs help untangling the heavy fishing nets by the riverbank, Tuna's hands move with swift, confident precision. Out there, she is the absolute master of her domain. She doesn't hesitate. She doesn't second-guess her instincts. But watch what happens when the sun peaks at noon and she steps through the wooden doorway to do the day's accounting. First, she carefully kicks off her muddy rubber boots, aligning them perfectly next to Henry's tiny blue sandals by the threshold. She washes her hands twice at the aluminum basin, scrubbing away the earth with coarse soap, almost as if she believes she isn't clean enough to touch the keyboard. She walks toward the wooden desk, and the physical transformation begins. The strong shoulders that just carried 50 pounds of harvest begin to round and slump inward. Her confident, purposeful stride turns into a cautious, hesitant shuffle. By the time she sits in the wooden office chair, she has physically shrunk. It is a deeply painful thing to watch the person you love lose their confidence in real time. She opens the ledger software, but every single keystroke is hesitant. She treats the computer with a fearful, agonizing reverence, secretly convinced that one wrong click will erase months of our hard work, or break an expensive piece of equipment we saved for 2 years to afford. She doesn't see the computer as a hammer or a hoe, tools that blindly serve her will. She sees it as a fragile, unforgiving entity that she must serve. The swirling corporate blue wallpaper stares back at her, a constant silent reminder. You do not belong here. This is not your farm. This is a machine, and you are just a visitor. The pressure of this silent dynamic was building in our home. Taking on the farm's finances was supposed to empower her, to share the heavy, invisible burden of our family's future equally between us. But as I watched her from the kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of tea, I realized the harsh truth of the situation. I had given her the password to the computer, but I hadn't given her the key to the space. She was stranded on the outside, looking through a cold glass window. The afternoon heat had settled heavily over the tin roof, bringing with it the lazy, hypnotic drone of cicadas from the nearby jackfruit trees. Inside the office, the only sound was the painfully slow, hesitant click, click, click of Tu Na's mouse, interspersed with her soft, heavy sighs. She was hunched over the keyboard, thoroughly exhausted by the sheer mental weight of trying not to make a catastrophic mistake. That dense, anxious silence was suddenly broken by the rapid patter of small, bare feet against the floorboards. Henry trotted into the room. He had spent the last hour sitting on the shaded porch with Ba Tang, completely absorbed in his own important work. In his small, dirt-smudged hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of white paper covered in bright, chaotic strokes of wax crayon. It was a drawing of our family standing next to the farm. Wobbly stick figures with giant smiles, surrounded by aggressively green grass and a massive crooked orange sun. Henry didn't see the tension in his mother's shoulders. He didn't understand that the desk was currently a zone of severe adult stress. He just saw his mother, and he saw a large, blank, intimidatingly blue rectangle that desperately needed some cheerful decoration. He marched straight up to the side of the desk. Attached to his tiny right index finger was a slightly dirty piece of clear tape. Without a word of warning, he reached his hand up, aiming to slap the sticky tape and his beautiful masterpiece directly onto the center of the fragile, expensive LCD glass of the monitor. Tu Na gasped. It was a sharp, terrified sound. She dropped the mouse instantly and lunged forward, catching Henry's wrist mere inches from the screen. "No, Henry, stop!" she scolded, her voice trembling with a sudden, disproportionate panic. "You cannot touch Papa's machine. You'll ruin it." Henry froze, his eyes widening in shock. The innocent pride melted from his face, replaced by a deep, heartbreaking confusion. His bottom lip quivered slightly. He looked from his mother's panicked face to the crumpled drawing in his hand and back to the sterile, glowing monitor. "But it's just blue," Henry mumbled quietly, his voice small and defeated as he stared at the screen. "It's ugly. I just wanted to make it look like our house." Tu Na let go of his wrist, her own hand shaking as she instinctively reached out to wipe an imaginary smudge off the plastic bezel of the monitor, terrified she had already failed to protect the asset. The fear of the technology had completely overridden the warmth of the moment. I was leaning against the wooden door frame, holding 2 steaming mugs of lotus tea. I had watched the entire interaction unfold in complete silence. Usually, when a young child recklessly approaches a fragile, expensive piece of equipment, parents instinctively unite in discipline. It is a natural reflex to protect the things you worked so hard to acquire. But looking at Tu Na's pale, incredibly stressed face, and little Henry retreating with his rejected gift, a quiet, heavy realization settled into my chest. We had spent 2 long years saving every spare coin from the harvest to afford this computer. It was supposed to be a tool to lift the burden of our accounting, to make our lives easier and our future more secure. But right now, in this quiet room, it was doing the exact opposite. It had become a cold, glowing dictator sitting on our wooden desk. It was demanding fear and obedience from my wife, and it was actively pushing our son away. The hidden cost of protecting this machine was that it was slowly breaking the peace of our home. I didn't scold Henry. I didn't agree with Tu Na's panic. Instead, I walked slowly into the room, my heavy footsteps echoing deliberately against the floorboards. I set the 2 mugs of hot tea down on the windowsill, right next to the wild yellow daisies. I knelt down until I was exactly at Henry's eye level. I smiled warmly at him and gently pulled the crinkled drawing from his tiny, trembling fingers. Then I stood up and turned to the desk. I placed the paper flat on the rough, dark wood right next to the keyboard. I spent a long, silent moment just smoothing out the creases with the side of my thumb. The chaotic, vibrant strokes of crayon stood out sharply against the dark grain of the wood, a burst of unfiltered life next to the rigid plastic of the keyboard. Tu Na watched me, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and a lingering, heavy apology. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She thought I was inspecting the desk, preparing to secure the machine further to reinforce the invisible boundary. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my work trousers and pulled out my smartphone. I held it perfectly flat above Henry's drawing, carefully framing the stick figures and the crooked sun. Click. A quick bright flash illuminated the dim corners of the small office. The silence stretched between us, thick with unanswered questions. I wasn't just taking a picture. I was preparing to dismantle a wall. I didn't say a single word as I connected my phone to the computer. Tu Na watched me with hesitant eyes as I quickly transferred the photo of Henry's messy, beautiful masterpiece onto the desktop. I pulled up a wooden stool and sat right next to her, close enough that our shoulders gently brushed. "Give me your hand," I said quietly, keeping my voice as calm and steady as the afternoon breeze outside. She hesitated for a brief second, still trapped in her fear of breaking something, but then she slowly placed her small, calloused hand over the cold plastic mouse. I reached out and covered her hand with my own, feeling the familiar rough patches on her skin earned from years of working the soil. Together, we slowly moved the white cursor across the intimidating screen, navigating away from her fears and towards a new beginning. "Right-click," I murmured softly. Her finger pressed down. A small menu appeared on the glass. "Now, move down to personalize." We guided the arrow together, a shared burden, a shared action. "Set as background." The moment her finger clicked that final command, the sterile corporate blue void vanished completely. Instantly, the cold screen was flooded with vibrant, chaotic life. Henry's bright orange sun and aggressively green grass completely filled the monitor. The wobbly, smiling stick figures of our family now stood proudly behind all her complicated ledger icons. The computer didn't look like a scary, unforgiving bank terminal anymore. It looked exactly like a brightly lit digital picture frame holding up the very reason we work so hard. Tu Na let out a soft breath. She stared at the glowing colors, and the rigid, defensive tension in her shoulders completely melted away. You cannot truly master any tool or conquer any new space until you deliberately put a piece of your own identity into it. For someone transitioning from the heavy physical labor of the earth to the invisible digital management of a family's future, claiming that software interface is a vital psychological step. That simple, messy desktop wallpaper changed the entire atmosphere of our room. I stepped back, picking up my warm mug of lotus tea from the windowsill, leaving her to her domain. Tu Na leaned back deeply into her wooden chair, her posture finally relaxed and natural. She confidently double-clicked her heavy ledger software to begin the afternoon's work. But before she typed a single number, she paused. She looked right through the transparent borders of the accounting program, smiling with genuine warmth at the little stick figures of our family shining brightly behind the math. The strange, cold machine had finally been truly invited into our wooden home. We spend so much time agonizing over the physical walls we build to protect our families, yet sometimes the most important spaces we need to claim are the ones we cannot physically touch. I leave you to wonder, what invisible boundaries are you still afraid to cross in your own daily routines? Whatever they are, just remember that no space is ever truly yours until you are brave enough to leave your own muddy footprints right in the center of it. Please share in the comments if you've ever had to overcome an invisible barrier in your own home. If our quiet life in the countryside brings you a sense of peace, please subscribe and continue this journey with our family.